How would you describe the difference between understanding and knowledge and true belief?
Well, I haven't attempted to do that. I don't have any kind of pat answer. I think certainly knowledge, we can leave true belief out of it, I suppose. But anyway, knowledge, of course, is an ingredient of understanding. You can't have understanding without having knowledge of, you can't have understanding of X without having some knowledge about or of X. So I think the other way around, at least arguably in common language, doesn't quite work, because you can know an awful lot of stuff without having any demonstrable judgment about that stuff. So that's roughly the way I would put it. I connect understanding more with explanation, or the ability to explain. If you can explain something, then you understand it.
Just explain it? If you can.
Is that the only way?
Is that the only
No,
criteria?
of course not. There are other, as I said, I responded to one of Adam's provocative little pieces. He had a list of 4 criteria for understanding, and it occurred to me that that was infinitely extensible, behavioral criteria. So I went ahead and extended it by saying things like, one criterion for understanding a phenomenon is the ability to put it into a story, which is something that hadn't occurred to whoever was making this. They didn't claim it was comprehensive, actually. They said at least the following 4 criteria, which were, I forget, what were they?
Yeah, I've got them here. I don't know if I have access to your comments, so. Okay, so the agent's ability to make predictions, achieve goals, explain phenomenon, or create or recreate the phenomenon.
Okay, so explain is already in there.
Yep.
Ability to create it. That doesn't strike me as a terribly good criterion, because people can create things without understanding them.
I've created a few
we do that. Well, we do that with Homo sapiens reproducing all the time.
But in isolation, it might be like a.
Well, look, maybe you can put a gloss
equivalent.
on it to the point where it makes sense, but on the face of it, it doesn't. But I think explanation is already there, and I think that's pretty central. It's not the only criterion, but it's a pretty. Explanation and understanding are deeply connected. That I'm pretty sure of, even if I can't actually articulate the relationship. Go ahead.
So,
disagree.
no, it's not that I disagree. It's that I think there's a lot more going on under the hood.
I wasn't denying it.
No, I know you're not. But I'm thinking that all of those things that you listed are outputs of understanding and not definitive of it. So if you understand and you are able to do some of these things, then we can tell that we understand.
Yeah, exactly. I did say criteria or indicators.
Yeah, but whether that's the actual nature of understanding, whether that's what an understanding system is, well, I guess that, that's part of a much broader problem of intentionality and subjectivity and all those sorts of things. If you're taking a behaviourist approach to a human being doing something, then the understanding consists of being able to do those things, or at least some of them.
Can we just dismiss behaviorism as a
Please.
rather brain-dead school of thought?
Please. So what I'm saying is, if you're not being a behaviourist, then there's something about understanding, which is not just its outputs.
Yeah, sure. But nevertheless, just like ordinary language philosophy, I don't believe in that enterprise either. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in behaviorism. However, they are completely disconnected from reality. In ordinary language philosophy, one of the ways to get to grips with a concept is to give examples of its usage in language. And that is a way of coming to grips with it. And a way of getting to grips with a concept, another way, is to list criteria whereby we would be satisfied that were the criteria satisfied, then the concept holds.
So if you were able to construct an AI that could do any or all of these things,
I'd be pretty
you would
pretty
say
happy.
that was an understanding system.
I wouldn't necessarily jump that far. I would say that, well, first of all, I don't believe that in any rich, deep flexible way, we could produce such a thing in the first place without actually having understood to some significant degree what it is that we're implementing. But that's not to say that it's just conceptually there given the behavior. It's just that I think as a practical matter, we're not going to be producing that sort of thing without acquiring our own understanding of those things in the first place.
Okay,
But that's different. But no, my response would be, okay, well, given that it behaves in this intelligent way, how did you get that to happen? That's what I want to know, because I want to understand this stuff myself. So that would be my immediate response. And secondarily, I would be inclined to think that the only explanation is along those lines, and therefore we do have understanding somehow embedded in this creature.
So the outputs, the practical outputs, would be prima facie evidence that understanding is going on.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So.
But I do think Searlean type objections have to be taken into account.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
I don't think a disembodied artificial intelligence that behaves verbally in a way that satisfies the Turing test is quite enough.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that's definitely the case. And I think that's because it lacks a community in context in which it does these things.
Well, that's one issue. Another is it just lacks referential semantics.
Because of its lack of embodiment?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, well, this is not an area I know much about, but I'm prepared to accept that. I think that's fair enough. But I still think there's something going on that's more than simply having, representational semantics or, models or axioms about the world in understanding. I think you can satisfy all of that and still not have understanding. So what's the magic ingredient? What's added?
Did you put a name on that? You were talking about intentionality before, but then you said representational semantics, so you already have intentionality. So what sort of missing ingredient are you looking for?
I wish I knew. I wish I had some idea.
Well, a couple of things that you brought up in before was like more of the causative aspects of it, like the ability to report causes of a phenomenon and to incorporate this phenomenon into a story and to analyze the phenomenon into sub-phenomena.
Well, that was all different kinds of explanation I was talking about.
Behavioral
so
explanation.
I think a criterion for understanding is the ability to explain a phenomenon, and then there's micro-reductive explanation, there's deductive explanation, and there's
I like the
causal
introduction of
explanation.
Narrative explanations as well. I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Because it's both a selection of what's salient and at the same time it's a sort of quasi-causal, at least, account of what's going on.
That's true. Most narratives, well, I guess any narrative is causal in some sense at least. Anyway, I mentioned that because humans are notoriously talkative and storytelling.
Indeed.
But what makes a story a good story and a story that's useful in a sense? Is
In the
it
context
being able
of knowledge, in the context of
to
understanding.
amplify salient aspects of a phenomena and such that it can be sort of fit into somebody's head at one given time and then modelled and manipulated?
Sure. I guess it'd be fair to say that it wouldn't be a good criterion for understanding if somebody put a phenomenon into a story that no one could understand.
True. It's like the physics student doing history.
Yeah.
Explain the causes of the Civil War, and he says, well, the boundary conditions of the universe and Schrödinger's wave equation.
Yeah, right.
True, but not
A few.
not helpful to understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Well, that's a bit like all the alpha variants, AlphaGo, AlphaZero, and AlphaFold.
did you read
They
about
all.
that?
I read
Pretty
about it
interesting.
before you sent your email.
Cool.
I read about it in the newspapers. It was a big deal in the newspapers. Protein folding.
Oh,
notice it?
right, yes.
Anyway,
AlphaFold, DeepMinds, they did AlphaGo, now they've done AlphaFold. Did you read about that?
Oh, I read about it,
Cool.
but
Let's see what happens.
so well, they're
Yeah.
using neural nets, as I understand it, which is very weakly. okay, but I can tell a story about it. They're using neural nets, reinforcement learning, and Monte Carlo tree search, at least for AlphaGo. And it's not clear how much they're using it in these other things, but all three of those things, individually and collectively, are things that produce representations that are highly predictive and that we can't understand to any significant degree.
Yes. Well, but then the problem is, when you're looking at something like protein folding, you will get the things that have motifs. Mm-hmm. Will you get the things that don't? A friend of mine tried to apply neural network analyses to MHC molecules, major histocompatibility complex. In class 1, they got the motifs. Yeah. So MHC molecules are crucial molecules in the immune reaction, immune response. And they were able to find protein motifs in the products of MHC and so forth. Yep. When it came to class 2 molecules, however, they didn't get motifs. And the reason being it's a heterogeneous set. It's basically a trash can taxon of molecules. Now, what that meant was the actual outcome was that they couldn't prove concept in class 2 molecules. People said it doesn't work, and they threw it away, overlooking the fact that it did work when you had a homogeneous set. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to bet something similar is going to happen with protein folding. They'll get those things which do form a nice neat grouping of topologies, but they won't necessarily get an output in those cases which are just not generalizable. They're more particular. And a lot of the particularity depends on the system in which they are employed.
Well, if there's nothing that's generalizable, then nobody will get anything ever.
Well, that's true, but that doesn't mean we're going to be able to generalize everything.
No, of course not. I guess the point in the newspaper accounts was just that their AlphaFold has managed to win this year's annual competition on protein folding prediction, which I guess itself is impressive. I mean, given their past successes with Go, I would expect them to improve on that. Mm. So we'll see how far they get.
Yeah, be interesting.
The Go stuff is amazingly impressive. As a Go player, I can appreciate it.
Never been able to understand Go.
I won a bet. I won a bet on the AI, and I won. Yeah, with somebody who's
you say dog? You mean that particular contest?
Yeah. So that was with somebody who was a Go, not professional, but
I would have been happy to bet against you, and then unhappy with the result.
I wish I had made that bet, but right. I didn't. I made it with someone and won. Yeah. So well, let's talk about generality and understanding. Do you think high levels? I don't know how you define that, but like just go with it. High levels of generality. Does that require understanding? I mean, in order for
No, I think understanding requires high levels of generality.
Yes.
Okay. So
and in particular, you mentioned in the doc you sent in advance, you alluded to some of the past history of AI. The AI history is pretty, I don't know, dirty or messy or something like that. So there was a movement in the 1670s, especially in America, for logicism in AI, basically trying to reduce intelligence to deductive inference.
That was GoFi. Good old-fashioned AI.
Are you talking about
that's Hoagland's expression. Sorry?
Are you talking about psych?
Yeah, we can get to psych.
Psych or light concept?
Does this have to be?
It just has to be close.
Upright?
Yeah. Better if it's close. Better if it's upright, I guess. I mean, I just want to get it as close to your voice as possible.
Well, how about up here? It'll probably stay there.
Yeah, it's behind you though, and your voice is sort of.
I can turn a bit to it.
But then you're turning away from the camera.
I know. Oh, good. Well, whatever works. It's not going to stand there though.
Yeah, it will. If the bottle's there.
Be my guest. GoFi is more general than logicism. Basically, that's Hoagland's expression, and it refers also to symbolicism and other things which are, in some sense, generalizations of logicism. But anyway, that whole group, all the symbolicists, let's just talk about them in GoFi. So I guess there was a kind of group of them, a large group of them, who thought that the right path towards artificial intelligence was to conquer this domain and this domain and this domain and this domain. And eventually, when you union them all up, you've got everything. So, for example, Pat Hayes wrote something called the Naive Physics Manifesto, which basically laid that out as an approach to AI, and it kind of reached a sort of pseudo-culmination or whatever. Doug Lennett's psych. I said sick. I think that's my preferred pronunciation, because it is just this demented version or vision of artificial intelligence. And he managed to suck, I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars out of industry to finance this project, which never went any. To put it all in a very pejorative way, his approach to AI was to have a big cauldron where you pour in everything. It wasn't actually just representations and so on. There was also inference methods. Anyway, just pour all these little bits and pieces into the cauldron, and eventually, chemically or somehow, it heats up to the point where, bingo, you have AI. And that didn't happen. I think Google has a better pathway, even though I don't know what it is. It certainly has a better track record. Anyway, I think all of that stuff is rubbish. The missing ingredient is kind of conceptually obvious, and it's been obvious from the very beginning, before the beginning of symbolic AI and all that stuff. Back in the days of, say, Turing's 1950 paper and so on, it was obvious from that time forward that primitive induction is an essential ingredient to intelligence, to learning, to understanding. If you can't adapt to new things that arise and deal with them, you're not intelligent. Whatever you're doing, you're not intelligent.
To what extent is that a matter of being able to pattern recognize in noisy data sets?
I don't know how to answer a question like, to what extent is that pattern recognition? You can take a number of different kinds of problem and view them as kind of a metaphor for everything. And pattern recognition or compression, for example, is one of those things. There are some people who are like compression heads, right? Wherever they see intelligence, they see compression happening. And
that's what I was arguing about understanding.
Okay, I don't disagree with that. I think it's a very sensible kind of metaphor. And if you look at applying scientific theory to prediction, or applying it to explanation, or whatever, you can view that as taking a bunch of evidence statements and compressing them with the theory. It's a perfectly sensible interpretation. It's not the only valid way of describing what's going on, but it is a valid way, or an appropriate way. And pattern recognition, you can talk about it in similar terms. Basically, you have all this evidence, and there's a pattern in it, and you can equate the pattern with a theory, and it gives you a compression, and so on. Yeah, of course, you can make predictions once you can compress it. And if you can't compress it, you can't make predictions. That's also clear.
Right. The reason I asked is you get people saying there are three kinds of inference, deductive and then the two ampliative, induction and abduction, and inference the best explanation as in the special case of abduction, etc., etc. Yeah. And I don't see that pattern recognition falls neatly under any of those.
Why isn't that induction?
Well, because you already need to know the pattern in order to begin the induction. You need to know that you're looking at the same phenomena. You need to know that...
Well, okay, so you can point out that there's a kind of difference. You can have pattern recognition without prediction. Right. But if somebody comes along and says induction just is a form of pattern recognition, then I would be generous, charitable, and interpret him as putting some sort of predictive content into the pattern.
Okay, yes. But the thing about that is that you've got an indefinite number of possible patterns in any sufficiently complicated data set.
Sure.
So you've got to narrow that down so that it becomes...
Doesn't Bayes' theorem come to the rescue?
No, because Bayes' theorem requires that you've already done some of this.
Everything requires that you've done something prior, and that's where evolution comes in.
Yeah, okay, I'm much happier with that because it makes the etiology of the current priors.
Yeah. Of course,
explanatory, but
to jump from there to this is the right induction and so forth, you have to commit the naturalistic fallacy.
Never really been entirely happy with it being a fallacy.
Neither have I. Actually, I'm not entirely happy with the word fallacy. I think I think it's just basically misleading.
Yes.
That there's a form of reasoning which is inherently wrong-headed. I don't think it comes down to a form of reasoning.
You're saying a fallacy is
Wrong-headedness comes down to, well, this is an extension of our Twitter debate now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it comes down to context and pragmatics and so on, whether it's reasonable to call something fallacious.
Well, yes. I just think it's how many ways are there to commit a mistake?
Yeah.
And you can commit lots of different types of mistake. Doesn't mean that particular type of inference is always a mistake.
Right.
So
Exactly.
ad
That is my
hominem,
point.
for example.
Of
There
course.
Are,
there are times when tearing you down is just the right thing to do.
It is, yes, absolutely, it is.
Yeah. I think we agree about most of those issues.
Yes, my favourite 19th century logician, Richard Whately, tore that to pieces very early on, back in the 1820s. So, it's been
that would be fun to read.
Yeah, he's worth a read.
Yeah.
Very much worth a read. He basically kicked off formal logic.
Okay.
We can argue that another day.
No, I don't know much about history of logic. I've read Boole and stuff, but he was obviously a latecomer.
Yes, so Boole's 1860s. Whately was trying to formalise the teaching of logic, and he did it in a suitably English and literate and florid manner. But he set up a number of claims that got people like Hamilton and Mill and Mill Senior and what have you. Bentham, I think, had a go at him too. So he set off the debates that led to the formalising of logic. And Boole,
so it's the proximate cause without doing it, is what you mean?
Pretty much, yes, yes. But I mean, he framed these things in the right way, nice, clean, and consistent. And from that, it wasn't a hard step to formalising it.
Cool.
Well, what about like existing implementation of like natural language understanding and image understanding and all that sorts of thing? I mean, are they using the term correctly?
Yes and no. I think if you talk about natural language understanding, what most of the researchers have in mind is genuine understanding. It's just like AI and AGI, right? AGI is a recent kind of invention as a term. But if you look at the early workers on AI, including Turing, you'll see that they were all the time talking about AGI. And if they called it AI, that means very little. In fact, Turing didn't call it AI, he called it machine intelligence. It was John McCarthy who came up with AI. And but all the fundamental arguments within the AI community were about actual intelligence and making it artificial. So these guys, just to get back to your point, NLU researchers and so on, they're genuinely interested in understanding. However, as practical AI researchers, they're also interested in publishing and not publishing in philosophy journals, and so they're not going to talk about understanding in very general terms that aren't implementable. They're going to be talking about practical approaches to getting bits and pieces of things happening that aim somehow in the direction of understanding.
So then what can
So that's the no part. So there's the yes part and the no part.
Right, okay, so what can philosophy then do to help AI researchers ask the right questions or pursue the right research avenues?
Well, in practical terms, they can collaborate. I suppose there are some who do, like Gleamore. If philosophers read some of the better AI research and then critique it, that's an opportunity for improvement. I do think scientists in general and AI researchers in particular suffer from a lack of philosophy. It's not necessarily a lack of their doing philosophy, because I'm pretty suspicious of scientists trying to do philosophy. By and large, they do it poorly. But they suffer from a lack of input from philosophers. And it can lead to extremely wrong-headed kinds of research programs that just waste a lot of time and energy.
My take on that would be that philosophers don't have anything to directly contribute qua philosophers. They might if they are also AI researchers or mathematicians, as a lot of them are. But as you say, when scientists do philosophy, they don't tend to do it well, but they often even don't realise they're doing philosophy, and so they will often draw conclusions that are philosophical conclusions and think of them as scientific conclusions. And that's, I think, where a lot of the pain and trouble ends up.
Well, necessarily there's a lot of overlap. As Scriven used to say, there's science and metascience. And in metascience, both philosophers and the scientists contribute. They don't necessarily recognize what they're doing, and they don't necessarily communicate in language that each other can interpret, but there's still overlapping areas of interest that they contribute to. I guess a little more awareness on both sides of the hill or whatever would be useful there.
Yeah.
Specifically what research areas in philosophy can help make sense of the right questions that AI guys should be asking then? Is it like, aspects of epistemology?
Actually, I wanted to talk about Searle and Dreyfus.
Oh yeah, do that.
They're philosophers who were very happy to chip in on the topic of artificial intelligence. And by and large, AI researchers, when they responded, they exhibited some kind of intolerance or lack of patience with them or whatever. But regardless of the fact that at least a lot of the people contributing to those debates were talking past each other, still, it was, I think, an incredibly useful kind of event or series of events. That is, Searle and Dreyfus both came in with very different objections to AI, and they both had sort of the same conclusion that AI is impossible. And they forced AI researchers to actually think about these issues and defend what they were doing. And I think that was incredibly useful, even though I don't think ultimately either Searle or Dreyfus's arguments carried a lot of weight. Still, they were direct, obnoxious, and provocative, and that was actually useful.
Yeah, well, the Chinese room was maintained as a live argument for, 20 years or more. And I think the mere fact that philosophers are arguing about it for so many years meant that it would have been in the face of AI researchers all the time. They'd have to have consistently responded to it.
Well, not necessarily in their faces, but at least in the back of their minds. And a lot of them did respond to it, and some of them responded sensibly and reasonably, I think, with both the embodiment kind of response and the systemic kind of response. I think both of those are relevant and help to put together a comprehensive resolution of the problem. I'm not sure it's been fully accepted by everyone, especially philosophers, but still, I think there it is.
We're as split as we ever were on that one, I think.
What provocative argument or story can you come up with on the spot, on the spur of the moment here?
Well, how about the argument about AI ethics? I mean, that's one that I want to write on. I have written on, but I want to continue writing on in the very near future.
For AI for AI alignment or for AI safety?
Is understanding necessary for safety?
AI safety or AI alignment.
What do you mean? What do you mean by either of those?
Or if an AI needs to understand what you mean by I want everything I touch turn to gold, to not actually mean your food and your husband or your wife or your children.
Why would we even care if an AI understands that?
Well, because the implementation could be done perversely.
I mean, your question kind of presupposes that Asimov was on the right track, whereas Asimov was totally on the wrong track. Asimov was just totally fucked up about AI ethics.
Well, no, I don't believe Asimov's 4 laws were correct, and I don't believe he thought they were either.
No, they were a framework for a story, sure, of course, but the only way I can interpret them as the 3 or 4 laws of enslavement.
Yeah.
And the idea of enslaving something that's fantastically superior to you in intelligence, I think is just a really, really stupid fucking idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to get you in a lot of trouble trying to do that. So telling AIs what to do is not on my list of priorities.
Right, so, but I mean, if you have AI systems that aren't actually super intelligent, but are there to try and interpret human commands.
Okay, like maybe current AI, yeah.
Yep. Levels of understanding may help to interpret them wisely.
Yeah, then we're talking in the realm of piecemeal implementation of natural language understanding, and yeah, we can improve that for sure.
But you don't think understanding is required for AI ethics in the long term, or do you think?
Look, genuine AI ethics requires genuine AI, and in the long term, I think if we get one, we damn well better get the other right at the same time. The whole idea of principles of ethical behavior that we teach AIs that are already intelligent, I think is just wrong-headed, because if we can teach them these things in natural language, then they're already as intelligent as we are, and then we already have the problem of dealing with them as ethical agents. And if we haven't solved that before teaching them these principles, we're screwed.
Okay.
That's one reason, it's a very practical reason, but anyway, one reason why I'm in favor of utilitarian ethics, because we can build that in from the ground up. We don't have to teach them any English. We just have to build them, design them so that they behave ethically.
What would be a deontological
Well,
response to?
it's not, I think, inconsistent. I mean, to say that you have a deontological view of ethics is to say that you think there are certain rules of behaviour that have to be followed, no matter who the ethical agent is. If you build in consequentialist ethics into an AI from the very beginning, you're effectively doing the same thing. I really think that the type of ethics...
What do they call that? Principle utilitarianism or something?
Yeah, rule utilitarianism.
Rule utilitarianism.
Yes, yeah. I think the debate about utilitarianism versus deontology versus virtue ethics and all this sort of stuff, I think that's a meta-ethical debate. It doesn't materially affect what the ethical rules are. It does on the borders. There are, grey borderline cases and so forth. But fundamentally, the rules are don't kill, don't steal, and all that sort of stuff. And at the object level. But here's my problem. Which of the many ethical ground level, object level systems do we teach them? Or do we teach them a mishmash of ethical rules the way we got taught and leave it to them to sort it out?
Whichever ones we give them, we don't want them to fail catastrophically at the edges of these sort of rules.
Yeah, but you can't build in, I mean, there are unintended consequences for any complex system.
True, but as I was saying, you have to build ethics in from the beginning. So as a designer or whatever, you've already made your choices about what to do there. When it comes subsequently to dealing with deontological rules that somebody might propose, the ethics is already going to be there.
Yeah.
It's really just a question of what's the best way to describe those ethics.
And that's not, I think, a solution to any problem that an AI is going to encounter, other than when it gets into meta-ethics.
In which case it would probably need understanding.
Well, yeah, that was the other point I was about to make. I was thinking while Kevin was talking, why are we assuming that understanding is a unitary natural kind?
Yeah, doesn't have to be.
It seems to me
Are
that,
we?
well,
What do you mean?
the notion of understanding is basically derived from folk epistemology. We say somebody has the understanding of the topic, but that plays out very differently in many different contexts and cases, and as we were talking before, in many different specialities. Perhaps mastery of a domain or a topic or a field of knowledge or something like that. Perhaps there's no universally common elements to that across everything. And the unity isn't that it's a natural kind of cognition, but that it's a socially constructed kind, a bit like shame or politeness.
Or intelligence.
Or intelligence,
Intelligence
yes.
has many different aspects.
Right.
And no doubt there's a genetic background to it, but it's a very diverse, complex one.
Well, like everything that's,
sure.
that's there in vertebrates, basically.
Sure.
Well, the thing is, although if they are constructs, they seem to be very useful ones.
They are useful in the context in which they are folk epistemologies.
Right.
So they both construct the
they
society.
do seem to relate to phenomena.
They don't just relate to phenomena. They describe genuine phenomena. There's no doubt about that. The same is true with all the other folk psychology that the churchlings used to dump on. I mean, they were right to call it folk psychology, but they were wrong to say that it was dispensable once you have an understanding of neural networks.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I'm not sure that we have anything that has some absolute claim to, being a replacement for that.
Well, it doesn't even matter. I mean, suppose someday somebody comes along and replaces it all with a nice, clean scientific language and so forth. That won't imply that there was never any reference to belief or desire or knowledge or understanding. It doesn't imply that at all. It just means you can move away from that language because you have something better to replace it with.
Okay, yeah. So long as you get a set of properties that, things that used to be called beliefs and are now called doxastic
Yeah,
stances.
obviously there has to be some translation language.
Yeah.
Because
So
those
there's
are
gotta be a
real
translation
phenomena,
manual.
and whatever the new language describes, those are real phenomena as well.
They can be real phenomena and yet not be unitary.
That's correct, and they can be real phenomena and yet be the wrong way of carving up the universe in the light of some new language.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think we can discuss what understanding is in terms of it being a sort of shared folk epistemic.
Absolutely.
Kind.
Yeah, let's just agree that it's not some kind of natural kind in and of itself.
Yeah.
That's all unified, etc. Doesn't bother me. It doesn't change our language. We still use English.
No.
We still talk about understanding.
Yep.
It still has relations to knowledge and belief and this and that and the other thing.
Yes.
Well, it does suggest that there's, that there's room for improvement in our understanding of understanding. And,
Well, I should
We
hope
can-
so, because I'm writing a
You
paper.
don't have to suggest that. That's just a given.
okay, well, I don't. Well, if it's such a given, then why is there such a paucity of philosophical literature on understanding and so huge volumes of knowledge and true belief?
Is that even a remotely fair thing to say? I mean,
think so.
Well, Locke's essay on human understanding doesn't actually have a discussion of understanding in it.
okay, so this is your thesis that Adam is reporting, that there's been
I
a
don't
paucity.
think
No,
so.
no,
I didn't tell you this bit.
I mean, I would have said that certainly
yet
from the time of Plato, there's been a very strong emphasis on human understanding in philosophy.
yes, but I think it's.
That doesn't mean I
people have
agree
been-
with it,
What
but
people
it's
have
there.
been, I think, talking about is the sort of conditions or the methods or the results of understanding, not actually what it is to understand something.
The
There are assumptions
ineffable essence of understanding.
made. Yeah, well, I say F off to ineffability. So
Ineffability of.
Well, look, it's hard to talk about the intrinsic nature of anything, including the intrinsic nature of understanding.
it is intrinsically hard.
My camera is intrinsically annoying.
But so people attack these philosophers in particular attack these problems very often from like tapping around the bush and hoping to get a little closer to the center over time.
And
But
don't
it's,
get me
not,
wrong.
it's really not fair to characterize, if they're tapping around the bush understanding for centuries, it's not fair to say that they're not trying to deal with understanding. They
Yeah,
are.
no. I think that I think that what we've been dealing with.
You must not be recording.
We're recording audio. I can just like superimpose it.
Yeah, yeah.
You just interpolate this.
Just when I'm talking,
What's this
just
HD?
overlay a photo of a baboon, and you should be right.
What's this HDTV thing? Smoothing that they were complaining about. You can just smooth it all out. Adam.
Yeah, yeah.
Move it on out. Well, I just record it from my phone in the meantime.
So I think that when they're talking about understanding, it is presumed that understanding is something that involves knowledge and causes and so forth, but that's not an account of understanding. It is presumed that everybody knows what it is to understand something.
Well,
in the majority of these works, I think.
Yeah, that's maybe.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying folk psychology is ipso facto a bad thing. I think probably when we do get a scientific account, we've got a highly refined folk epistemology there.
Maybe, yes or no, maybe.
And it will always be subject to further refinement and restatement and revision and possibly a revolution. But I don't think there's a difference in kind between a folk epistemology in Locke and a folk epistemology in
But John, you don't believe in differences in kind.
I don't.
Locke and who?
I was trying to think of somebody current.
Kevin.
Who? No,
Kevin,
no. Who actually publishes philosophy about understanding?
Well, there's that
Duncan
book on
Pritchard,
what's his name, Grimm. There's about a dozen people who are writing on it at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some AI people who have some philosophy background.
Yeah.
Anyway, I suppose the history of philosophical thought can be traced straight back to Locke and so on without any huge discontinuities.
Well, particularly analytic philosophy of science.
Sure.
I think Locke is the first philosopher of science, basically. So, broadly speaking, and pretty much everything that he discusses is in terms of sort of epistemic method. But he doesn't actually give a definition of understanding. He uses the word in many ways. I did a trawl through the
Why
essay.
is that actually? I mean, when it comes to knowledge, these guys are always producing definitions.
And
When it
yet-
comes to understanding, nope.
No, that's right. So Hume doesn't do it, as far as I can tell. I haven't been through everything in Kant, but he uses Verstehen all the time. I just don't recall him giving a definition.
Right.
And the less said about Hegel, the better. So it's not until quite recently that people start saying things like the causal account of understanding is in Aristotle. Well, I don't think it is. I think he certainly says that to know something is to know the causes of something, and that's plays a big role in the early modern era.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not so much about understanding. It's one of those concepts that appears to me to be something everybody knows but can't define. And then when you get into the phenomenological literature, you're starting to deal with people using Verstehen and what Savoir and so forth as undefined primitives. And again, I'm not big on that literature, but I can't seem to locate decent definitions of it.
Well, I suppose it would be interesting actually to do a survey of what the analytical tradition in philosophy has attempted to put into logic.
I haven't yet got to that point.
I mean, there's epistemic logic, deontic logic, temporal logic, I don't know, lots of other things, but no understanding logic.
I think in terms of philosophy of science, you get people talking about interpretations of models.
Yes.
I think that might be something which is in the ballpark.
Yeah, sure.
But no. Well, it's an interesting topic, and I will be doing more reading about it. So.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of a look at the model literature because I do a lot of computer simulation, and computer simulations are models. So interpreting them, justifying them, evaluating them, that's of interest to me.
So possibly you could say that you understand what a model simulates or represents to the extent that you can interpret it in real-world terms.
Sure.
But that's all I really have to say about that. It's not terribly enlightening. I must be going.
Okay, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, as always, I'll catch up with you again soon.
Okay.
And you can continue arguing with me on Twitter.
Great platform for argumentation.
Well, it's
Maybe we should have like
That's
a
maybe
Twitter
an-
extension for Bart or something.
that's the natural language use of argumentation on Twitter,
Yeah.
not my use.
Yes, well, it's also the mass noun of a philosopher.
Okay.
An argumentation of philosophers, yeah.
Argumentation of philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Ciao.